Welcome everyone. My name is Frank Delgato, CEO of NL Greenlabel. We have a wonderful program with very interesting speakers. For example, Professor Cecil Konijnendijk will talk about the 330-300 rule and his experience and observations on how it is applied worldwide. Then Florian van Witzenberg, founder and CEO of Tygron, will take over to talk about AI and digital twins. Next, Maarten Albersen, head of the technology at NL Greenlabel, will discuss the translation and applications of the 330-300 rule in a broader integrated decision-making framework to make the living environment measurable. Finally, and at the end of the webinar, there will be an opportunity to ask questions to the speakers, as well as to Lodewijk Hoekstra, founder of NL Greenlabel. Feel free to put your questions in the chat during the webinar so we can share as much knowledge as possible. Cecile, may I ask you to inspire us about the magic of trees?
Perfect. Thank you so much, Frank, and welcome everybody also from my side. Let me just share my slides, my presentation here. Yeah, the magic trees for trees, as we call it these days as well. This rule or guideline or a rule of thumb, however you want to call it, that tries to bring trees and green spaces close to everybody in our cities, in our other settlements, but basically everywhere where people live. There's an opportunity to make people happier and healthier through the 330-300 rule. So, and I think this really fits very well with the times that are changing. We see more focus on the greening of our cities for different reasons. Of course, climate challenges, the need to cool down our cities, but also adapt cities to the impacts of climate change. But also things like a public health crisis, more and more people that are struggling with mental health issues, physical health issues, but also, for example, loneliness. So there's definitely a role here for parks, trees, and other green space. This is in Dutch, but I translated the title for you. A recent study by Stichting Steenbreek, which is a not-for-profit in the Netherlands that works a lot with the greening of cities, found that half of the Dutch people regularly finds it too hot in their gardens, on their balconies. So actually climate change has really, from something very abstract, become something very specific and very concrete. People really experience this, and I think all of you will agree that we can regularly feel this, right? That it gets really hot, it gets very dry, temperatures feel very unusual in many cases. For example, last week here in the Netherlands, it was unusually warm already. So this is just another driver for a lot of the initiatives that we see around the world, and I have the pleasure to work in many different countries where greening is done at the local level, but actually also sometimes at the national level, like in the United States. There's quite a lot of attention, as well as at the European Union level, where there's now pushes to green our cities, to set tree canopy targets for all municipalities in the European Union. In the United States, it's probably a great example that about $2 billion extra went to urban trees, urban forests under a new bill, the Inflation Reduction Act. And this has really led to a manifold increase of the budget for urban forestry in US cities. And the focus here is really on vulnerable communities and on bringing trees to these communities to help cool down and help these communities get healthier, but also adapt to climate change. So I've been working a lot with cities, but also international organizations. For example, the Nordic Council of Ministries asked me to come with some guidelines, some ideas of what kind of principles should we use for the greening of our cities to make this really worthwhile. And the 4 principles that we came up with have to do with proximity. So in order to get the benefits of green trees, you need to have them close to you. And it also actually includes visibility. So the visible green around your home or your school, etc., is really important. Of course, connectivity, we need to create green structures that are well connected, and it also make it easy for us, as well as for other beings, animals and plants, to move around in a safe way. We need diversity, so we need a diverse range of green experiences in our cities. People have different preferences for what type of nature, what type of green they want to interact with. But also the diversity of people in general will need to be kept in mind. And then finally, and this is actually a big topic now worldwide, I would say, is this idea of equity, green space equity, meaning that everybody should have access to nature, to green spaces. It's almost like a human right. And this has been coined tree equity in North America and the UK. So this is really an important part of this discussion as well. Well, of course, this is great, right? To have some principles to work with, but then the next question could be, well, how do we implement this? And how do we work with some clear metrics? This is a new report by the Berkeley Group and Create Streets in the United Kingdom, which was offered to the UK government. And here they actually talk about two types of metrics for green space and green space benefits. The first is exposure, so kind of being exposed to green around you without maybe actively looking for it. So trees around you, basically, canopies around you, visible green around your house. And the second is really access, so the active opportunity you have to go to a park, to a forest in your city, to be engaged in all different types of forms of recreation. And the Greening Up report actually says, well, we should probably find metrics that combine these two, exposure and access, find some kind of hybrid method. And they actually recommend the 330-300 rule as a metric that should be implemented for greening streets and squares and cities in the UK. So this is one of the initiatives, I think, that really shows that there is a need for metrics like the 330-300 rule, or the trees rule for trees, or the trees rule, as we sometimes call it. This is a website that we newly made where you can find all kind of articles and information. And the basic idea is really that everybody should have visible green, so we should all be able to see at least 3 large-sized trees from where we live, but also where we work, where we go to school, and maybe where we are cared for, like in hospitals. And we should also have 30% tree canopy cover in our neighborhood. So this is not an average for the whole city or municipality, because you can often have, of course, right, you have one part of the city is very green and the other not, but 30% for each neighborhood. And then finally, and this is in line with World Health Organization recommendations, nobody should have to walk more than 300 meters to get to a high quality public green space, a publicly accessible green space. Well, this sounds great, right? 330-300, but luckily and good for this, there's also quite some research to support it. So when I came up with this rule about 3 years ago, I was really inspired by a number of studies that were coming out and that are summarized in this paper that really showed there's something behind these 3 numbers, these 3 metrics. First of all, we know from studies, also some recent ones, that visible green, so green in front of our house, around our schools, is really good for our mental health, for our well-being, for performance. So people that are working in green environments, they have higher performance and higher creativity in their work, for example. And a recent study by Ordonez and colleagues in Australia and Canada showed that having a tree in front of your house is associated with greater well-being. So most people are actually pretty happy to have trees around where they live, although we also know, of course, that sometimes people are a little bit annoyed with some of the nuisances that trees can cause, like falling leaves or branches. But in general, people are really happy to have trees around them. And even more recently, a research study by Clemson University has specifically looked at the 3 trees principle and found that if you have 3 trees or more, there's actually a better odds that you have a good mental well-being. So there's actually also now a link that shows that the 3 trees is really connected to mental health benefits. Well, why big trees, you may ask? Well, big trees, of course, have an impact, and they've been found, for example, by this study by the KU Leuven, the Catholic University of Leuven, to have a larger impact on our mental health. So in a study in Brussels, they looked at neighborhoods where there were large trees, but also neighborhoods where there were a lot of small trees. And it turned out that where there were a lot of large trees, that people bought less medication against mental health problems. And actually in areas where there were a lot of small trees, that effect was not so strong. So there's really a need to think about those large size trees for mental health, for other benefits, for biodiversity, and of course also for the cooling effects they have. And based on the study, I had a chance at the VRT, the Belgian TV, to once again reiterate the 3 component of the 330-300. Then there's a whole suite of studies, for example, coming out of Australia, that has shown that if we go up in canopy cover at neighborhood level, 10%, 20%, 30% plus, then we see a lot of health gains. So studies have looked at things like people sleeping better, the birth weight of young children when they get born is higher, which is a good predictor for health later in life, but also, for example, cardiovascular disease, general health, mental health. Every time you show, if you get to 30% plus, you see that these benefits are higher. And in addition to that, a recent study was published in The Lancet, one of the top medical journals, found that if you achieve 30% canopy cover, you can actually reduce the temperature during hot periods that much that you could save 1/3 or maybe 40% of people who died prematurely during heat waves. So just to put that in perspective, in the Netherlands in August 2020, we had about 550 people who died prematurely because of a heat wave. So we could have saved, let's say, 200 people if we would have had greener neighborhoods in our Dutch municipalities. And at the European level, that could have been tens of thousands of lives saved during hot summer spells. So this is, of course, a pretty strong argument for having more tree canopy drawn into our neighborhoods. Then I already mentioned, right, the World Health Organization's recommendations. They talk about having a green space of a decent size, 0.5 to 1 hectare within 300 meters from where we live. And of course, this should also be a green space that offers different opportunities for recreation. So not just a piece of grass, as maybe shown here on the report, but diverse vegetation where there's shade, where there's sun, where there's biodiversity, etc. So it was really good to see that a group of researchers at the Catholic University of Leuven did a study of the 330-300 and looked in the literature, looking at about 100 scientific studies, well, how strong is really the evidence for this rule? And they found that based on their assessment of these studies, they really feel this is a good, well-supported rule that has good scientific backing and scientific evidence that combines exposure and access and also visibility with use of green spaces. So they really feel strongly that this is a good metric to recommend, and that has actually also resulted in some policy action in Belgium, as I will tell you in a little bit. Yeah, so then, of course, 330-300 is a nice idea, and it's now about 3 years old. It has matured. There's quite a lot of research, about 20 studies now, I think, have specifically looked at it. But how do we put this into action? And I sometimes joke that, having been a researcher for many years, I published a lot of papers and books, but probably the highlight in my career was when I made it to the French Cosmopolitan with attention for the 330-300 rule, which was pretty cool to see that a lifestyle magazine is picking up on the importance of trees and green. This is not for you to see everything, but these are just some of the examples of organizations from the UN to not-for-profits, to Greenpeace, to all kinds of cities and political parties that are now using the rule actively. In the Netherlands, I think we're approaching maybe half of all municipalities that are doing something with 330-300. But for example, in France, there's a recent development that several cities and municipalities like Nantes and Nice are starting to use the rule. So it really goes step by step into different countries. One of the countries that has been really active recently is Belgium, where there has been a push not only from the green sector, but also from the health sector. So a book came out by several doctors that recommended 330-300 as a good preventative tool to avoid or prevent bad health. The insurance companies in Flanders are working with it. I just heard that in Ghent, a group of about 80 medical professionals, doctors, etc., has written a letter to the politicians calling for 330-300. So this is really a strong argument from the medical profession that we have to bring trees and green close to everybody. And this, the nice thing to see is that in Flanders, a region of Belgium, 330-300 has now been adopted as a new green norm, and not just by the Ministry of Environment, but actually also by the health people that are integrating this into their health and climate action plan. So nice to see that even at the regional, national level, the rule is being picked up. I don't expect you to read this is in Swedish, but one of the cities that has done a lot, and actually I was there just yesterday, is the city of Malmö in Sweden that has politically adopted 330-300 and actually put it in their city master plan, which means that actually it has legal status now. And means also that the city is doing all kinds of things to bring different municipal departments together to really find more collaboration and coordination when it comes to trees and green spaces. So they had, for example, the 330-300 conference for the whole city, all city departments recently. And they've been doing these kind of assessments. This is the city of Malmö. You see the old city there in the center. This is a typical kind of inner city neighborhood, and then a neighborhood on the outside of Malmö. And they've been looking at, okay, what is the current canopy cover? But also where do we see opportunities to plant more trees to have more canopy? You see, even in the old city, where there's a current canopy cover of 8%, you could go up to as high as almost 20% just by using public space. So this is not even including private gardens, etc. And if you look at the other neighborhoods, in Sorgenfree, for example, you could get very close to 30%, and in Lindengen, which is a suburban area, as high as 40%. So often the comment you get in many places is, well, this is really not realistic, right? 30% canopy cover, 3 trees, that's a lot. But it turns out that if you start thinking a little bit different about public space, private space, designing, redesigning, there are actually quite a lot of opportunities to move in the direction of 330-300. This is the Nantes Greater Metropolitan Region, 14 municipalities that adopted a new tree charter just a few weeks ago, signed by the mayor of Nantes. And you see here also they're calling for 330-300 in that charter. Well, bringing it back to our own country here, the Netherlands, cities like Groningen in the north have had quite some ambitious policies and visions for working with green spaces. And one of the things they actually decided to do is to go into the old part of the city, the Grote Markt, so the big town square, and actually starting to put trees in there, which in many cases would not have been possible a few years ago, historical centers, and so you wouldn't really touch. But now they actually put, I think, 38 new trees and creating a new woodland, a new little forest in the heart of the city. And I guess these kind of developments we'll start seeing more in places like Barcelona, Paris, etc., where actually streets, car habitat is taken away, and trees are being brought in and people's space is created. Well, already we heard a little bit from Frank, the work of NL Greenlabel in the Netherlands. We'll hear more about it soon. But of course, yeah, it is also about really nature inclusive development of our cities, building, architecture. Quite a lot of developers now are getting interested. And in this guidance in the Netherlands, 330-300 was included for nature inclusive design and development. And one of our developers is Ballas Nedam, where you see here their CEO, Onno Dwars, who was presenting about 330-300 in a recent talk. And in one of the areas they're developing here in Utrecht, the city where I'm based, they actually use it as a marketing principle as well, and as a quality assurance principle to say we need 330-300 neighborhoods, which is really nice to see. Well, if you look at 330-300 maps, one of the areas that often turns out to be the worst, right, the reddest areas on the map are business parks and industrial areas. So we often see very little green space there. And you can say, well, yeah, it's maybe not needed, but actually people spend quite some time there during their days. So we should really also green those areas by bringing trees in them, creating 20 or 30 minutes walk so people can go during their lunch, because the research is very clear that 10-20% difference in people's performance, less sick leaves. So these areas should really not be forgotten. And another typical area to look at is schools. So greening of schools, of universities, etc., will also be very important, because these areas are often also losing a lot of green space these days. I think one of the charms of the 330-300 is also that it's easy to comprehend. So there's a lot of research, there's a lot of thinking behind it, but actually it's pretty easy to communicate. And citizens, residents can use it. Social media campaigns, people can get engaged. There's several examples of groups around the world that have used the rule to argue for new parks or more trees in their streets. And this is really nice, I think, that it's easy for everybody to talk about 330-300. It may still be a bit complex sometimes about what do we exactly mean with all the details, but the basic principle, I think, is pretty clear for everybody. So in terms of perspective, I think that, we see it now being implemented more and more. It's now 3 years, a little bit more than 3 years ago that I launched it. And from rule, it's becoming more an inspiration as well. People start talking about the importance of trees and green. It does allow for setting clear targets and benchmarking and measurement and monitoring, which I think is important. It does help also, I think, to take trees and green more serious. This is actually along a wave that we see where there's more focus on the health, the climate benefits of green in the city. The evidence base is pretty strong. I don't think there are many metrics actually that have a stronger evidence base. So it is really based in the research, the latest research. It is communicative, easy to work with, trees for trees, etc. And I think what I really like is that some of the best reactions I've gotten have come from the non-green professions, the engineers, the planners, the architects that say, well, finally, from the green sector, we get some clear guidance of what we need to have in our cities to make them healthier, happier, and more resilient. And I think maybe most importantly, right, it's really the start of a conversation in our cities, between our communities, our politicians, our developers, our planners, etc., our ecologists to jointly create greener and better cities. So with that, I think I'll pass it back to you, Frank.
Great, Cecile. Thank you very much for sharing these insights and your passion for trees and all the examples that you showed in Europe, but also abroad. Like also the idea that we can change the shopping experience with trees. I think many women would like and appreciate that. Although we have a bigger task to create a living environment for our next generations. You mentioned that you have seen a lot of applications around the world that also emphasize that for a sustainable living environment, a broader perspective is needed. You indicated in an earlier one-on-one conversation with the two of us that our methodology and integral approach, where the 330-300 rule is applied, is unique. Could you explain why this is and why an integral approach is so valuable?
Yeah, I think especially given the opportunities and tools we have now, right? It's really good, I think, to start bringing things together when it comes to sustainability requirements, to greening, to health. And I think 330-300 is a great tool to be used in combination with other tools there. So thinking about new residential areas, but also transforming residential areas, new private area, like industrial areas. So I really do see the opportunity here with the work, for example, that you're doing with NL Greenlabel, right? To bring it all together. And I think 330-300, it's definitely not a tool to be used in isolation. So I'm all very happy to see this included with other great opportunities of benchmarking and really setting a good a threshold for sustainable development.
Yeah, great to hear. Thank you for explaining. Also, seeing a lot of our partners into the examples that you shared. Um, Now we're going to dive into it a little bit deeper on how we apply the 330-300 rule. So I will give the word to Florian van Witzenberg, CEO of Tygron, the platform for making advanced calculation based on mathematical models using their digital twin. And he will answer if you need to use AI. So, Florian, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Cecile. Very interesting to hear your perspective. What I'll do, because the title of this webinar is about digital twinning, so I'll give some context about digital twinning and just a few words about myself so we get into the digital twinning from my perspective. So I'm Florian Witzenberg. I'm CEO of Tygron, and I started my career. I went to engineering school and I started as an hydrologist. And as an engineer, what do we do as engineers? We collect data, we have a calculation, and then we produce reports, right? That's a traditional way of working. And what I'll show you is that we can disrupt that way of working because there is huge amount of data available, and it becomes every day there is more data available. The calculation rule that's in the school book, you can put it into a computer. From data towards integrated calculations and visualizations, we can disrupt the way of working where we produce all these reports towards an integrated way of working. Anyway, I'll show you a few slides to explain this. So I'll explain about the part of the digital twin, and that's very complementary to Cecile, but I hope NL Greenlabel can bring them together in a few minutes. At Tygron, we make the Tygron platform, and we call it accelerated simulations for engineers. So the user of the platform is the engineer. And like I said, as an engineer, what are we doing? We collect data. We want to be in control of all that data. And we steer calculations, and we want to be in control of these calculations. One of the challenges is, naturally, I'm a hydrologist, so I calculate water. Cecile is advocating green spaces. Other departments in the engineering firm can advocate livability or housing or infrastructure. So you have all these silos, and how can you bring them together to get an integrated, well-balanced approach towards city planning? Well, that's what we make the Tygron platform for. So you can go from data towards approach. I'll show you that. And one of the main challenges in the new way of working, because this is introducing a new way of working in the spatial planning and engineering, is as an engineer, you want to be autonomous, you want to be able to control your data and the output of your data. And yeah, we'll get also a bit into the AI and physical calculation models, because one of the challenges with AI is that every time you run ChatGPT, for example, you get a different answer. And that's very handy for an engineer that needs to be able to run the simulation again and get the same results as they were before. So that's one of the main challenges in this modern times. Well, at Tygron, we do this for several years. The platform is up and running. If you have more questions about it, please send me a message. What it is about is you want to process data towards a digital twin. And depending on what kind of data you put into your digital twin, you can assess different analytics. So naturally, for the 3300 rule, you need data on the trees, but also on the layout of the city. For example, street data, because you want to get to a park where there's green within 300 meters. So you need to combine all that data. Well, that's not new. That's often done in GIS. But what's the challenge is you want to have a perspective on how you can manipulate the city in an integrated approach. So this is what we make at Tygron, the Tygron platform. It is, on one hand, combining all the data as is to build a digital twin for the city as is, but then you can upload a city plan and see what's the effect of a new plan instantaneously. And then, because it's instantaneously and it's visual in a 3D world, you can have a different dialogue with all your stakeholders in the city. Well, just a few words on the technology drivers, how this works. On one hand, you have GIS data, and from the raw data, you can get the digital twin immediately. And due to the connectivity, you can let the information flow from one program to the other. So you can prepare, for example, all your data in QGIS or SVE software, make the calculations in Tygron and get it to something else, maybe QGIS again to do additional analytics, or get it to Unity for a nice visualization with Google Glass. I don't know what you want to visualize in. And one of the most important parts is the high performance computing. And what we use is actually the same background technology as that's being used in the AI. So it's a GPU revolution for calculations, but we use that mainly for the physical calculation models. So that it's the extreme calculation power, but then the physical calculation rules. So each time you run a calculation, you get the same answer instead of a different answer. I'm happy to share more information about it, but there's limited amount of time. But there is a revolution going on. So Cecile was talking about the era of green. I'm talking about the era of high performance calculation. And a month ago, I was in Silicon Valley at the NVIDIA Congress. And this is, in a few years, the amount of calculation power that's available on the GPU, the graphical processing unit. Most engineering tools are based on the CPU, the central processing unit. CPU is very good at many tasks, but each task is pretty slow. And this GPU is extremely fast at just calculations. So we use the GPU for all this, the calculation of all these data and analyzing the impact of the different scenarios. And that allows you to play around with a digital twin, a virtual world, and say, what if we plant trees here? What's the impact on the 330-300 rule, or other indicators that are important in the city? Just to give a minor impression on the development of the perception of digital twins. There are many forms. It's very hip to talk about digital twins, and they're all correct. So that's one of the challenges when I was asked, tell something about digital twins. A few years ago, it was smart cities. In a few years, it will be metaverse or omniverse, I don't know. But for me, the digital twin is about designing the city and instantaneously calculate and visualize the impact, so you have a different dialogue with your stakeholders. And yeah, that's what NL Greenlabel is doing with the 30-300 rule. They use the digital twin to play around with the city, in addition to different performance indicators. But I hope that that you from NL Greenlabel will talk about it more. And thank you. If you want to know more, please send me an email. I'm happy to share more information.
So thank you very much, Florian, for sharing your time and insights on digital twinning and AI. What I've learned, if we want to plant the 330-300 rule, we need not to base it on AI. Otherwise, we get less trees or too much trees. But very, very interesting. Maybe you can explain a little bit more about why the collaboration with NL Greenlabel is so unique and how advanced the calculations for the 330-300 rule we apply.
Yeah. So we make a machine that's able to calculate, but it doesn't give any qualification on is it better or worse. And that's the beauty of the NL Greenlabel. It is a label. It tells you, is it better or worse.
There was a little glitch in your Wi-Fi, I think. But thank you. I think Maarten can explain even further what we do and demonstrate how we do it. So Maarten, he is the head of technology and insights at NL Greenlabel, and there's no better person who can explain what we do and how it works. So Maarten, the floor is yours. Please share your insights.
Thank you very much, Frank, and thank you, Cecile and Florian, for the introductions. And I'm going to try to combine the scientific insights of the green world, but also of different aspects, for instance, the health and the biodiversity world, and how we use this computing power that has become available to us via Tygron to make a holistic methodology to work towards a vibrant living environment. And of course, the 330-300 rule is an important element in that. First, what's at stake? What is the dilemmas that we're working on? Well, life on Earth as we know it is at risk. Our cities are expanding. Biodiversity is declining rapidly. Climate change causes a lot of hazard for our urban environments, but also for the rural environment. And of course, with that, there are financial triggers that also stimulate to work towards a more sustainable outcome. And our vision at NL Greenlabel is to restore the balance between human and nature, and to work with nature-based solutions towards this more vibrant, sustainable living environment. We do that with our data models. As mentioned before, we are a label, so we try to measure how sustainable is a place. But of course, we use measuring as a method to get to a more sustainable outcome. And when you're measuring, it's always important what do you measure, how often do you measure it, what is the quality of your measurement, and therefore we use our scientific advisory board and literature information, things that become available, such as the documentation underneath the 330-300 rule. And we apply this together with a partner network with over 200 partners. And they differ from our data suppliers, but also landscaping companies, architecture firms, advisory firms, real estate developers, governments. They're all using our methodology in a way to work towards this sustainable living environment. And a part of this model is, of course, that you need to train to share your knowledge, because it's also not sustainable if organizations are always dependent for all their knowledge external, but try to train people within organizations to be able to work with it. The fundament under our methodology is that we prove it with our scientific board of advisory. Here you see the different people from different universities in the Netherlands. And about the methodology, we focus on two different places in the outdoor environment. We focus on the plot level. We do this with our terrain label. So, for instance, for one school, apartment complex, really a low stakeholder, low complexity situation. And we have the NL area label that we apply to bigger areas. This could be a neighborhood, could be a business area. And we use that through, for instance, development process, but also for the existing environment, we apply it to measure what is the current quality, where are risks or opportunities to get to a higher quality, and over time we can monitor this by actually repeating the same scans but updating the data that's underneath it and seeing how the built environment changes, whether it becomes greener, whether it becomes grayer. On the right side of the slide, you see the different themes from our methodology. We have 8 themes that we bring into that we analyze for each area. And with the green highlighted parts, we can do those with geodata, and the white ones are more on the qualitative side, because we believe data is amazing. The calculation opportunities are tremendous. But you always also need more the qualitative side, and together they provide the perfect insight to work towards the vibrant living communities. Of course, you can also base already a lot of information on the quantitative side, but for instance, if you have a tree, it's very nice, it's good, but if you have a tree that fits well within the environment and also has value for biodiversity, it's more interesting. And at this point, we cannot determine all this information yet with geodata. And of course, we zoom in today on the 330-300 rule. And through a process, we apply it by scanning the current situation, often setting ambition with our stakeholders. This could be the municipality, a developer, or other partners. Then we use Tygron with the current situation that we already analyzed, and we add a plan for remodeling a street, for adding a new neighborhood to a town, and we see what the outcomes are and give that back to the landscape architects or the developer to make their plans better, to use those insights to promote it, and then of course they can reiterate this circle to optimize their plans. And later on, we also do certifications to check whether they actually achieved what the ambition originally was, and prove whether it's a sustainable living environment with a holistic approach underneath it, or to distinguish between greenwashing and the effective outputs. And in the end, of course, also checking whether the area develops the way it was designed, or that adaptations need to be made to achieve the goals that were set for the area. Important with this is, of course, connecting stakeholders. The vibrant living environment is the common goal, but of course, sometimes you need a bit more incentives to get all the stakeholders involved, or to get the budgets there. And therefore, insight into the quality and the risks are very interesting. For instance, for the quality, we also report for taxations, how much is a property worth. We don't determine that, but we provide the people who have to determine that with information about sustainability, about climate risk, to show the differences between that. But on the risk side, we also report on, for instance, the risk on fluvial flooding, on earthquakes, on those aspects, because it's a part of a living environment. It's part of whether you can live there happily or not. And underneath that, you see the main stakeholders that we work with on these projects. So as you can see, it's a very diverse community of stakeholders, And I think that's also one of the great strengths, that we can connect them, that we give them a common understanding of sustainability, and that they can work towards the same goal with this. And a part of that is the 300. Here you see a dashboard. As Florian mentioned, Tygron is compatible with all types of data formats, interfaces. We have built our own application to work together with Tygron. In that application, we can select, for instance, a municipality and analyze all neighborhoods separately, and create such a dashboard to see how does each neighborhood do. But we can also do this, for instance, for a real estate portfolio, or for a school square, or just for your own home to see what are the risks, what are the opportunities, and how can you work towards it. Well, the real interesting thing is, of course, when you start working with it. I always say I started studying spatial planning because I like the game SimCity, and now I'm playing SimCity for a living. This is Tygron that we see here. Tygron already connects to a lot of databases, but we add some more, and in total we use 60 different data sources to create this 3D living environment. As you can see, the buildings are in there, the roads. We know approximately how busy a road is. And for the 300 rule, green is a vital element. Together with our data supplier, Cobra Groeninzicht, we know where the trees are, how big the trees are on a grid of 25 by 25 centimeters. Everything is measured. How high is the shrub? How big are the tree canopies? And we use that for all the different models in there. And it's also good to engage with stakeholders, that you can go to street level, walk around the neighborhood, check the sidelines. Everything can, of course, be automatically be made insightful, but it's also useful to be able to do this and show people what the differences could be. For instance, if we go to the free rule, here you see map of the sidelines to tree. The green areas, you can see 3 trees. The yellow areas, there are less than 3 trees within the site, and the red areas don't have any sites and trees. Now, well, we have a pretty green neighborhood here, and what we often see in the Netherlands, the public spaces provide a lot of green, but when you zoom into the houses, often the rear ends of housing doesn't have a lot of trees. And also the business area surrounding it, for instance, here in this harbor, doesn't have many trees. So here, perhaps the working environment might be a bit less attractive. The 30% rule, together with our scientific advisory board, we interpreted this one a bit differently. We took a combination of the canopy cover and the average vegetation between 0.5 meter and 2.5 meters, combined that for the not per se the canopy cover, but the leaf coverage of the environment, because we also do separate heat stress modeling using Tygron, and the canopy cover is especially effective for heat stress, but for instance for visibility, for walking along green, also shrubs and that average height green can be important, so therefore they advised us to also incorporate that. And then of course the 300 rule, where we use the data of Cobra to see how close buildings are to a green park or environment, but we can also generate this based on the infrastructure model that's underlying our cities, and check whether you can walk to different places. We see here the separation between the infrastructure for cycling, walking, and the infrastructure that's only meant for cars, so that you can also see how that influences routes. But this 300 rule is a very important element for us, but it's a part of a holistic approach. So additional to that, as I mentioned before, we also, for instance, use heat stress mapping. So here you see the physical equivalent temperature, how a person perceives a place on a warm day. In this situation, the outdoor temperature is about 33 degrees. When you're in a green area within the shade of the trees, it can go up to 34 degrees. When you're in an open field, but it's not very windy, it can go up to 45 degrees because the lack of wind. But for instance, on a paved parking lot, it can even go up to 48 degrees. So that's more than 50 15 degrees higher than the actual temperature is. So for well-being, that's a huge effect. And of course, the tree canopies influence this data in many ways. But we also look at water nuisance, pluvial flooding. Here you see a rainstorm that occurs once every 100 years. And we can see how the water runs down this hill, moves into this neighborhood, but also that there might be some buildings, for instance here, where there's almost a meter of water next to the building. So those are at risk of getting damaged. And therefore, of course, many things, elevation is the most important driver, but also a green surrounding takes up water, provides infiltration opportunities, and thereby helps at reducing the risk of pluvial flooding. We also connect, for instance, the free rule to the sides of buildings. Here you can see, for instance, what sides of this building has the site on free trees. So you see that 75% of this building can see it, but on this side it's red marked, so you don't have those sidelines. And when we're talking about protection of health, we also look at air quality and noise. Here you see a noise map, and of course the interactions with green are also possible to model in there and see the effects of changes and adding green to absorb that noise. And it becomes interesting with these maps. For instance, if you take this 30 map and you add a new neighborhood, what would the effect be on the 30 result? And here we see that there was less green. Here it was even a bit gray area. And then we insert this new plan of a different neighborhood, and we see that the whole area has become much greener with these plants. And of course, you can also determine, okay, how big do we want the trees in there? What would the effect be? And together with these opportunities, these data engines to be able to calculate this, to directly have, for instance, the difference in a heat model between the current and the plant situation, based with guidelines like the 330-300 rule, we try to provide an insight into this holistic sustainability of the living environment, and provide all our partners with whom we work with the right insights they need to develop, to reorganize, to maintain our cities, our living environments in a healthy way, and restore the balance between people and nature.
Great explanation. Always when I see you doing this magic trick in Tygron, I'm flabbergasted of the functionalities and what we can do with it. And all in the benefits of making impact and the living environment. So thank you for that, for those insights. And the scan you mentioned, it gives a score of A till G, and it gives also enable people to change and make impact. Like if the environment has a certain score of a D, how can you go to an A score, just like the energy label? Am I right?
Yes, and also the landscaping companies, for instance, who work with these methodologies, can use the scans and also the qualitative aspects, combine those to make a new plan for an area and actually make that change.
Great. Thank you very much. Now we go to the part of ask the founders anything. So and we are have just a little bit time left, but and thank you, Cecile, for participating in the chat, giving all the answers or a couple of answers to the questions. So how can municipalities implement the 330-300 rule as a green norm? How will that work in practice? I think, Cecile, there are already some information on the 330-300 rule. But as you have seen, we can also calculate the city and see what is possible within the city if the 330-300 rule is applied. If you would like to know more or have a specific demo, let us know. but you can also look into the dedicated website with implementation instructions. Some other questions in the chat was why did NL Greenlabel start this initiative? I think that's one for Lodewijk. Lodewijk, can you explain why you started this initiative NL Greenlabel?
Yeah, of course. Welcome everybody. My name is Lodewijk Hoekstra, and I'm working for television as a television gardener now for 20 years. And in my work, I found out, although working with green and telling this good message about that green is good for you and for health, we didn't have a method to make sustainability and the value of green measurable. And as long as you can do that, the role of the green professional is always on the cost side. And where we have a lot of knowledge about plants, biodiversity, creating healthy environments, it wasn't valued in the process and in the way cities are coming together. So this is like 15 years ago, and then we thought, well, there are all kinds of labels, but not an integrated way to say something about the sustainability of a product, of a plant, or a whole development. So this is why we just started, and now it's a real movement with 220 partners, like banks, big developers, green professionals, and we try to make it into a national standard. So every time we talk about the living environment, we are able to make it measurable and to quantify the value of green. And we try to do it in a simple way, like the labels from a washing machine. And it enables municipalities, but also developers and other stakeholders into creating a uniform language. When we talk about sustainability and the value of green, we can make it measurable, and you can take it from the vision of a plan, the start, into the way you manage it and realize it. You can perform long term. You can monitor long term if the goals are achieved. But this is why we started it, and we hope to make a contribution in a better, greener planet by doing this.
Right. For our next generation, thank you very much, Lodewijk, for making time to joining this webinar as well. Another question, maybe for Maarten, Florian, Cecile joined. Can you apply this in every country? So I think it will be for NL Greenlabel, Tygron, but also the 330 rule. Can it be applied worldwide? Who wants to start?
I can jump in quickly. Yeah, so I think the answer is yes, right? So you may have to make some adaptations in terms of, for example, how you define everything depending on your local context. But I know 330, 300 is in principle usable across the world. And my feeling is it's the same for the other two, for Tygron and for NL Greenlabel. So, I mean, the principles, I guess, are widely applicable. What would you say, Maarten and Florian?
For us, definitely. I think the 300-300 rule is quite unique in how universal it can be applied, while other aspects that we often work with are very specific to, for instance, climate regions, soil types, and those aspects. And since this is more based on the human health, human well-being, it can be applied in every region. And for us, it might be difficult for each place to monitor and map out all the cities, where are the buildings, where are the trees. But as long as there are data about this, as long as we can work with it, then it can be met, it can be applied.
So, and also the power of applying the rule on the Tygron platform is it's scalable. So like Maarten showed, that one project, but that's become a template. So wherever there's the data available, we can apply all these rules instantaneously. So not only can we apply it anywhere in the world, the whole set of rules has become scalable for any location in the world.
So, if I'm right, the methodology, the platforms, the rule can be applied everywhere, but you have to dive into the country on which data sources are available, and also look into the specific areas on soil, heat stress, and other factors, if you want to broaden a holistic approach.
Yes, indeed. For the holistic approach, more is needed. But for just applying the 330-300 rule, I think the data can be rather easily be combined with data sources which are globally available, and also together with partners with whom we work toward to this. I think they are already doing this, and it can be done. So if people around the world are looking towards this, we can definitely help with that and combine you with partners to set this up.
Yeah, great. So one other
Maybe
question: why
one more
why
thing.
only?
I just want to, like the Netherlands, real showcase in the world, being a delta, very crowded. We are one of the most crowded and dense countries in the world, and we have very little room to build and to. So there's a big challenge, and we have a lot of data over here. So I think if you combine our knowledge of making sustainability measurable, and the knowledge from Tygron and all the experts together, that's quite unique. And we are happy to share this knowledge and this vision and this tooling with other places in the world. So
Thank you. Yeah, so we make more impact on a global scale. So I think we can talk for hours about this subject, all of us, but we're running out of time. Um, I think we had a great conversation, good feedback also in the chat. But now it's the time to take action and save the world for us and of course our next generations. If you would like to learn more on how this could be applied in your country, please put trees in the chat or send an email to office@nlgreenlabel.nl. I want to thank all the speakers and all the guests and all the participants, Cecile, Florian, Maarten, Lodewijk. Thank you very much. Hope you all inspired and engaged to make impact. So this was the webinar. Thank you all, and yeah, hope you see you in the next webinar or in a one-on-one conversation where we explain how we can transform your country with more trees.